As the world fell, it was hard to know who was more crazy.
You promised to help us.
Me or everyone else.
This is a very kinetic movie.
This was an exciting one for me.
There'd always be something amazing going on.
This wasn't going to be a run-of-the-mill big movie. It's just going to be rock and roll.
A lot of movies have the talky bits and they have the action bits. In this case, they were happening together.
The first half of the film is an enormous chase. The second half of the film is a race. Wall-to-wall action.
George and Brendan McCarthy and a couple of other storyboard artists basically wrote the story in storyboards. It was built from graphic. More like putting together a comic and how do you tell that story in a visual. So it was fantastic while it moved forward, but it was completely irritating if you suddenly decided one of your characters only had one arm and you had to go back and redraw 90% of the storyboards to reflect that fact.
It was indeed something which was pretty non-verbal. I mean, people obviously speak in the movie, but they speak only when it's necessary.
It was all in George's head, and he was using Brendan and myself to visualise those ideas. And so through that course of 2 years, we were slowly surrounded by more and more storyboards. So it got to the point where anyone that came into this room would have to wade through loads of storyboards pinned to these display boards.
It was 3,500 panels around a room, and I would say a good 80% of those panels are reflected in the images you see on the screen today.
The visuals on them were epic. And he managed to not only capture them, but he captured them with a very limited amount of CGI.
What these storyboards did is it told us which car was going around, which crash, who was on it, and so gradually you could break it down, as one has to, and be very accurate as to how long it would take to shoot and how you'd want to shoot it.
The long chase and race that is the backbone of the film requires not just a desert, because visually it gets a bit tedious after a while, but needs 4 or 5 different flavours of nothing, and I hope that's what we've found here in beautiful Namibia.
And if you look at this movie, it's 140 vehicles driving at 140 miles an hour, 140 kilometres. The distances involved and what we're doing are huge. The challenge from a production side was very much to bring all that facility and all that resource to hand, so that George had the ability to go big, go wide, go small, go fast.
The whole film is on the move, so your set is constantly moving through a very dusty environment, 50, 60 kilometres an hour.
We didn't breathe for 8 months making this film. There's a great challenge, just logistically, trying to dramatize a story that's in constant movement is very, very tricky.
Action!
It does definitely create some challenges being on the move all the time. First of all, everything has to be done radio remotely.
For us, each vehicle had its own unique environment where we could rig from, where we could get performers to perform an action without them falling off the thing, to how to cover the rigging up so it doesn't look so obvious in shot.
Nothing ever goes out on set that hasn't been tested completely. We wouldn't allow it to.
It feels to me like opera because it's so big, it's so expansive. It's a blend between reality but awesome, huge spectacle.
None of it defies the laws of physics. It's not people flying or space vehicles or anything like that.
All the crashes are real crashes, all the cars are real cars, all the stunts are real stunts. You know, we have a lot of CG assist in removals of safety cables and to help with the backgrounds. But it was really about trying to go back to the roots of Mad Max 1 and Road Warrior, Mad Max 2, to get that kinetic energy on camera.
I'm kind of averse to 100% CG shots. If it can be avoided, I always love to have some practical live action element in there to ground the shot. Even if you end up virtually replacing everything, it still inherits something from the original live action that is a valuable thing.
I was just speechless when I saw the shot of the Armada going across the desert where we meet Max and his muzzle is on the front of Nux's vehicle, and there's this incredible shot on the edge arm that starts on Max in profile and we see Nux and go up to Slit, and then it comes around to the Tacoma and the Doof mobile. Like, this is the most jaw-dropping shot I've ever seen.
95% of what I shot on the action unit was shot on the move, and we shot it all from an edge arm. And you know, that's a piece of technology that was never around during Mad Max 2 days, and it's still literally quite new. And the way that we used, I think, is even newer again. So that was a really big thing, being able to, you know, to be constantly on the move with the camera.
One of my first concerns, having shot quite a few movies in the desert, is dust. It always is. It gets into everything. It affects basically everything that's used on a film. And one of the first things I brought up in one of the early meetings was, are we going to be needed to try and control the dust in the environment? And his answer was, no, dust is our friend.
We got used to it, but it was extreme, even so much that some days we had to stop shooting because the drivers couldn't see where they were going, but it's also amazing what they can do in the conditions that we shot in.
Hey guys, let's get out.
The locations really did become a major part of how you determine what the sequence would be. We were never restricted. In Namibia, we had nothing but open spaces, so there was never a thought of trying to frame something out so you could actually include the frame totally. So it was just a unique landscape.
So this will be all the vehicles on this speed run, in the whole group. There'll be a flash effect on the car, which will indicate when the cannon starts. Roll cameras, please.
The idea of the black-on-black roll was obviously the very first stunt in the film. And so we were trying to work out how we could do that in a very different way, but was still incredibly dynamic, and how we got around the normal problems that you have with rolling a car at really high speed.
If you look at Road Warrior, we did a stunt which now is quite famous, in which Guy does what they call a T-bone, who's going for a world record, where he's on a motorbike and he hits a vehicle which has just rolled and he flips. But what had happened is that his leg clipped it and he went into relaxation mode, knowing that he was injured. So now, all these years later, he wanted to do this roll, and he wanted to roll a car in sand more than anyone else had done before.
And so we started working with the special effects guys.
We aided them with a flipper, which is a different type of car spinning device, along the same lines as a nitrogen cannon, but it's actually a mechanical foot which comes down underneath the car and lifts one side off the ground. And again, as the guys steer into the turn and the roll, the flipper hits the ground and forces the car over.
Well, let's have a good gag. Guys, looking forward to it.
And it was sort of really new technology with the rollover mechanism that we had, and I was involved in sort of the testing process of it. So I really thought, well, you know, I'd like to do it. And it was one of those ones that had a whole combination of aspects. You were in extreme close proximity to other motorcycles and cars. It was very precise camera placement of where we wanted the car to actually end up. So it was really something that I felt, you know, more comfortable doing myself than sort of asking someone else to do, having done the rehearsals and understanding how the system worked. It was just one of those ones we planned to be as fast as we could possibly go, make it as good as we could possibly go, so it sort of set a bit of a tone for what's going to happen in the rest of the film.
The skills of the stunts are amazing. You've got stunt performers from every type of stunts you can do.
Probably one of the most unique gags that we've done on this show is jumping a guy called Morsoff off the back of the fuel pod, which is on the war rig, and he had to have 2 spears and stand up on the back of the pod and dive off on the move onto one of the buzzards down below, and we had to fly him off the back and stop him just above those, obviously, so he didn't spear into them. And then in a later shot we've blown the vehicle up like he's landed on it and exploded it. As with all of what we managed to do on the film, it was all done for real. So it was just a matter of some very good rigging. That was done by Keir Beck and his team. That was challenging because the rig on the back of the war rig was massive, and it involved a lot of truss and a lot of, I think, 5 people to operate the system. There was camera guys hanging off it, so there's a lot of maths and physics, and it's very complicated. And issues are obviously the thing is on the move while we're doing this stunt. We basically put him on a decelerator system so that we actually pulled him up literally within inches from the top of the vehicle. Acting in a movie which is visually driven, as in watching what a character does by seeing them go through one physical event after another and how it affects them, was a very difficult story to tell.
Good shit, please.
When Tom came in, immediately started breaking down beat by beat by beat. Why am I looking at that person? Why are they looking at me? What motivates this? And he went through everything. And that, to me, even after 35 years, I just learned so much in that conversation of just listening to Tom, the way he as an actor would break down every beat of that fight scene. And I walked away thinking, wow, I've just realized again how much more there is than just the physical. You know, it's what motivates each of those moves.
Push me out. Push me out.
Out a bit, and
like
then
that.
In and out.
Happy with that.
Boom.
And then the shots are.
Grip, yeah. And then we go out.
And then the shots are.
Charlize is a very talented physical person. She knows exactly where she is. She knows whether it's, around the vehicle, coming in and out, on top, whether it's working with a gun. She, again, is very gifted in her ability to be able to make it look like everything she's doing as a character is something that she's been doing all of her life.
I'm not an incredibly methodly driven person or actor, but I felt like there was just nothing else to do but embrace it.
My fight with Charlize, we had something else worked out. Originally, I'm supposed to grab her, kind of breathe in her face because I'm all pissed off at her because she betrayed the imperators as well. And then through the conversation with George, Charlize, we agreed that it's better she headbutts me. And the fact that she headbutts me kind of just brought the whole character to life again. It came out of the choreography, and that's what led to the drama.
The other fairly large sequence that we did was at Rossing Mountain, where we had Rob Jones as the rock rider chief riding off the side of the mountain, about 48 metres down into a catching net that we'd placed down the bottom with mats in it and cardboard boxes to maintain him once he'd landed.
Yeah, the catching area also.
You couldn't half rehearse it because he was going to ride off the side of a cliff.
Where they set off some of these bikes, they were on like several thousand feet drop-offs, just to get the jump off a rock. It was like, God, people, you look over, you get that sort of vertigo feel.
Yeah, that was pretty stressful for everyone on the first run. We basically cherry-picked the best freestylists that we had in Australia, and incredibly talented young riders. And what we did then was take all the moves that they're most comfortable doing in an arena or as part of their own shows or in their racing careers, and we varied and changed those to fit into what we needed to do on the script.
There was one moment where I'm sitting in the back of the war rig, and Steve, one of the fantastic stunt drivers, drives the Bigfoot up a ramp in the canyon and flips it and rolls it. And I remember watching it and just being like, oh shit, is he okay? Like, what's going on? It was another one of those moments of like, oh, I've got to carry on acting in the scene, damn, but I kind of just want to be watching that. That's awesome. It's a lot to take in, you know. It's kind of. I remember this is one of the few films where I've got chills during scenes. These stuntmen are insane, and they're doing insane things. And I don't understand a lot of how that's even physically possible. The polecats alone, like there are guys who are actually jumping from poles onto cars at speed.
The idea for the polecats came way back when I saw street performers on poles and they were leaning back and forward, swaying as it were, and I thought they were really interesting. So when it came to doing the movie, we designed the vehicles, but I said there's no way that we're going to have real humans on a moving vehicle. So we said, okay, let's comp them in. Let's shoot the guys on the poles, and then we'll comp them into a moving vehicle. And Guy did some tests, and they had hydraulics, and it looked puppeteered. So it looked like it wasn't in the hands of the guy doing the swinging, it was some other force.
I have a good friend, Stephen Bland, who's been part of Circus Soleil in Las Vegas for over 20 years. He was a stunt performer in Australia, and said, look, show us some of the pole work that you guys do. We just started off slowly and just went out on the road. That was a newbie for all of us. The special effects team had been working fairly solidly with George on designing a way of creating a metronome effect on the back of a vehicle that performers could be on and swing back and forth as a way of transferring from one vehicle to another.
And it was also getting a pole that was 6 metres long and sometimes longer that had enough strength, but also a little bit of flexibility to be able to put, you know, an 80 to 100 kilo actor up there and be able to get to horizontal and not bend.
The guy on the top can actually pivot and operate himself to a certain level. Additional weights or other men are bouncing off the counterweight, give him a mechanical advantage, and we can actually get him then all the way down to ground level and back up again while driving at speed.
There's no room for error. If that breaks, that person's going to be injured. So, you know, that was kind of something that we really had to be 110% on top of it.
It created for us a very intricate system that the performer also had to manage their own performance while performing and de-rigging themselves to transfer or to transfer onto something.
It brought tears to my eye. I couldn't believe it was real. So it's completely real. And I just didn't think we'd be able to do it for real. They were up there with chainsaws, they were up there with thunder sticks. They were doing all that action, and it's just wonderful.
It was one of those things that from the beginning of the shoot was, you know, not something I was excited about. I mean, overexcited probably about. I was scared, you know, and I wasn't looking forward to it. And he strapped me on it anyway, and that was that. And it was scary. It's scary. But again, you know, I was just standing at the top of it, going back and forth a bit. There was some poor bugger going out there doing it for real for weeks on those polecats. Weeks on it. Months. Every day, you know. So, you know, respect to the polecat.
I'd say the people eater fuel truck explosion was a big deal.
In movies, we see a lot of explosions, so you kind of got to do something a little different and work off the cliche. So before the main climax, we wanted a great explosion.
We had this fantastic expanse of desert, and the special effects guys had a remote control truck, which is basically 3 giant tankers driven by a large tractor trailer in the front. And we literally remote controlled it across the desert, and on a preordained spot, they basically blew it.
It was balletic, and I guess in the same way that people use fireworks, they used these explosions. It had wonderful tendrils going out, and it was progressive.
There were over 1,000 litres of petrol in the explosion, along with a lot of primacord, which is a high explosive initiator.
It was a big event, and doing it on the move as well sort of makes it a bit more challenging.
The war rig has to roll in an incredibly particular way and stop and wedge itself in the middle of this gap in the mountains. Again, we wanted to figure out a way that we could do it in a spectacular manner and do it for real.
Stunt guys are going to put the truck into a little bit of a slide, and then they basically hit the button. And the button is basically firing the high-pressure nitrogen into the top of the cannon. It pushes the slug out. The slug can't go anywhere because it's pushing against the ground, so the only way that gas can escape is to lift the truck off the slug.
Lee, in all the stunts, drove the war rig. So when it came to do the big climactic role of the movie, of course, Lee had to do it.
He was able to put it in spots that, you know, we could only dream of being able to put it.
The difficulty of that shot is that it had to land precisely in front of our cameras.
It's just getting the positioning right, so when I fire the button, I'm in the right position to hopefully be in the right spot, you know. That's the main thing. I'll be happy if it is.
You build up to a stunt and there's that sort of tension that builds up.
And camera, truck movement. Action!
As I watched it on the monitors, I glimpsed Nux, but I thought it was Lee, and I thought he'd shaved his head. And the vehicle would flip right over, right onto what I thought was Nux's head through the sunroof.
He landed on his...
Everyone said it was okay. I said, But what happened, what I'd forgotten was that was Nux's dummy. And he was obviously on the other side with the full helmet and cage and so on. And when we looked at Nux's dummy, it shaved off the top of the rubber latex of the top of the dummy.
How was it? Yeah, it was great. It looked like it landed on your head. It did.
He hit the exact spot he needed to. It came perfectly to the camera.
Yeah, it worked well. It worked true.
The Warwick is now rolled and basically filled the hole, which is Emma's rock. And because the doof is so close behind it, it basically then smashes directly into the Warwick.
All of the speakers at the top here, the musical instruments, the trombones, all of those have been drilled out and have squibs inside. So when the doof wagon impacts the Warwick, we have a trigger on the front of the doof wagon, which will fire off all those squibs, and then everything is basically free to move forward.
The great advantage I was able to do is to do the opening crash and the end crash. So I was able to bookend the film, which was a great feeling. We had a mark halfway down the 1 mile run-up that we had in a board position. Once we passed that line, it was just staying true to the course and enjoying the view as you close very quickly on another truck at 85 kilometres an hour. Came off incredibly successfully. George got the shot he wanted, which was the end shot of the film. I walked away with no problems whatsoever. So I'm very happy with my career doing stunts, and I think it's time for the young fellas to have a go at a few. And I just hung my helmet up on a good one.
That's good. It looked pretty spectacular. Oh, yeah, wonderful.
Oh, fuck!
The cars in this film are ridiculous. They're absolutely ridiculous. The sound of these engines.
Whew. It's like an aircraft kicking into life.
I mean, the noise, the
machines are just complete masterpieces.
Mad Max was always about cars. The cars were a metaphor for power. And the one thing that George was very keen on and understood, I think, is that in a world where there's next to nothing, what little there is left needs to be loved.
Just because it's the wasteland, it doesn't mean that people can't make beautiful things.
Based on the story and the characters in the story, I was able to feed in suggestions as to what particular vehicles, like the 59 Cadillac body or the 32 Deuce Coupe for Nux's vehicle. And these vehicles were then worked on by the mechanics to end up with what you see on screen.
The vehicles did evolve from early boarding. The practicalities of building these vehicles necessitates rethinking those designs, but you do see the core of every single idea was there from the very beginning.
This looks fantastic. I know it's a lot of work. Yeah, there's a lot of love, and it's metal, it's tough.
All the vehicles were real. So when you see a vehicle that's got a V12 motor in it, it's got a V12 motor in it. They were full working, enormous off-road monsters.
are almost like an extension of the wardrobe of the characters.
The original Mad Max car, 1972-73 XB Ford Coupe, with the Scott hat and blower, known and loved throughout the world, or at least by those petrol heads in the Mad Max cult.
The V8 Interceptor stayed with Max for 3 of the movies, and in the old westerns, each cowboy had his favourite horse. I think Roy Rogers had Trigger. Well, I think Max has his Interceptor.
Halfway through the film, Max realises he's being attacked by another super blown nitrous vehicle. Not only is it his car, but it's been turned into an off-road vehicle. Tyres upgraded, rear end lifted, more clearance. It becomes a Citadel caltrop car. Caltrops are these metallic objects that can be chain dropped that basically take the tyres out of other vehicles. The gunning crew on here, obviously you can see we have a 6-barrel compressed air gun that fires. What was Perspex covers for the lamps is now razor wire, as you would expect in the future. And of course, we added the screaming skull, the main image for our film. So it's really Max discovering, ironically, that he has to destroy his own car to survive.
That's mine!
Start your engine!
I remember the first time that I went to the set to look at the cars. I thought there'd be a few. I thought maybe, there'd be maybe 20, maybe 25 creepy, weird cars. And I got there and they had an unbelievable array of vehicles and way beyond anything that I expected.
Eventually you're going past war rigs, Chevrolets and V-dubs and Mercedes. The enormity of it was completely operatic.
For every hero, there's a villain. For every XB Interceptor, there's the Giga Horse. In a world where there's barely one of anything, to show you had power, he's the man who's got 2 of everything.
It's the King's vehicle, so it had to be quite spectacular, and that's why the 59 Cadillac, which I've always thought represented authority and status.
Because this is a movie on the run, the Giga Horse is virtually his throne.
You sit there and you pump that with your right foot, and everybody else for miles around knows who you are.
Pair of 1959 Cadillac Coupe de Villes.
Just the 2 colours are just great. I think he'd have all this polished. Someone would sit here for hours licking it.
Yeah, I feeling that'll be me.
Yeah.
My tongue's rusty. This is a pair of 502 big block motors. We're actually supercharging the pair. We have had it up to 125 Ks. We needed double tyres at the back, obviously to give us that rakish angle of looking like you're moving even when you're parked. These are actually super industrial tractor wheels that we've doubled up. We had to make our own interior rims and hubs. The exhausts we doubled up, 2 on either side. These are handmade. Beaten into it is the Immortan symbol, the screaming skull. George's original fight required that we had a harpoon and a flamethrower. So in a world where there's very little timber left, we thought we'd go with the timber finish. We've laid out the detailing of the Immortans brand and also reworked the base of the Cadillac rear bumpers so that it looks like the lower jaw of the Immortans screaming skull.
It's two V8 engines locked together into one shaft. What more can I say?
This is the Bigfoot, our monster truck that belongs to Rictus Erectus. His character basically needs to be reflected in the vehicle. Outsized, steroidal.
Rictus is 7 foot tall and a man-child.
We needed a single gunning position for Rictus to make him the most important gunner in the universe. We've added an extra gun at the back, a handmade 50 caliber machine gun.
It was a massive truck, full of armed to the teeth.
We were fortunate enough to find a Dodge Fargo 1940s tray-top truck. This particular one is a petrol-driven monster truck, so it's basically a 572 block, turbo 400 transmission. Top speed, it's good for 120. One of the great joys of the Bigfoot is the size of the tyres, over 5.5 feet high, and basically we're putting them through hell. So this is the excavator, the mother of all the buzzards. Their MO is to attack, to drag down, to destroy, and then to hack. Take away as many pieces as possible and build yet some more scary spikes to go off the outside of you. This is her double-bladed buzzsaw, with which she attacks the war rig and attempts to decapitate Furiosa. This one meets a fiery and explosive death at the hands of both the war rig and Nux and Slit. Every armada has a little boy on a fife and drum. We have a large armada after the apocalypse, so we have a very large boy on a fife and a drum. Enter the doof wagon.
There's 6 drummers on the back, beating these huge drums. Someone's hanging from straps on the front of a giant tank, playing music that thumps out across the desert. I just think that's the coolest thing.
George had always seen a crazy machine with speakers all over it that a guitarist would stand atop and play his wild tunes whilst everyone was chasing after these characters through the desert.
If you've got a great armada of vehicles, all with big loud engines, no one's going to hear a bugle or a bagpipe. So we went for the flamethrower guitar, and then you needed massive speakers.
64 speakers on what was originally an 8-wheel drive rocket launching truck. This is a MAN 8x8 air conditioning ducting that makes the drum resonators on either side. Our lead, Coma the Doof Warrior. His stage is another FJ Holden base and body. Fortunately, he's armed. This is also a flamethrower used in a battle against Max himself. This lovely beast is the People Eater. It's a fuel truck and is driven and belongs to Gastown. He's basically the embodiment of the industrial, military, corporate universe. The front is a limousine, extended, widened Mercedes limousine on a Kaiser six-wheel drive American ex-military truck. It's pulling double tankers, and those tankers are working as a horizontal cracking station. They're actually making fuel as they drive along. This tanker is set up so that the war boys on the back can actually refuel the moving vehicles. There was a requirement to try to give him a bit more bling, and so we started to build, and we ended up with this wall of bling. Welcome to the interior of the People Eater's limousine. He has a lovely handmade steering wheel of skulls, and they said horsehair, but I haven't seen any horses in the apocalypse, but there are a few grey-haired women now walking bald. The transmission operator is pistol grip. Our rear basically has the many ledgers of which he keeps count of loss of war boys, loss of blood, loss of fuel, loss of everything. This is the Peacemaker. It's a fully handmade, treaded tank vehicle. Bullet Farmer is rich in armaments and weaponry, hence the detailing is almost all 12-gauge shotguns. The exterior is actually a couple of Valiant Chargers, and then rework some of the panelling with pieces off a Cessna. So basically it's an aircraft, Valiant muscle car, all mounted on the world's fastest tank.
I get to drive one of the V8 hot rods. Just a mean-looking little car with upturned exhaust pipes.
Nux's car, 32 Chev Coupe, which is a fairly common hot rod project for people around the universe. It's a real V8, supercharged, turbocharged, blown, nitrous injected. We've had to give it ground clearance, more lift, heavier off-road tyres, a hybrid of sorts from your basic hot rod kit car down to your off-road death machine.
I knew from reading the script that there was a war rig in there, so I knew that there was going to be a big tanker, but the tanker itself was about twice the size of what I expected. Just completely otherworldly, and you're dwarfed under this giant vehicle, and you think, you know, how could it get any crazier than that?
The war rig, heart and soul of our film. It's both truck, transportation, hot rod, tank, warrior, and for George, chapel.
The war rig is, after the human characters, the next most important character.
It's the stage in which the most intimate drama in the most extravagant exteriors takes place.
In its own way, it's a beast.
Very early on, he told me that the overall look of the vehicle should be animalistic. That's why it has this big hump in the middle, as if it's some sort of beast in the sand.
Peter Pound in particular, he's got a very strong sense of machinery. He drew it, he worked on it, made a beautiful model.
This is a 1/10 scale model of the war rig, which was basically constructed as a guide as to what our final design should look like.
Well, I think they fire out of here. This is a little weaponry place. It just needs to be something in there. It just feels like, yeah, there's a temptation to cut it off there, but we need that extra bit. Yeah. I love it, Colin. I love all this.
The most optimal vehicle to actually get through the entire film was a Tatra, which is a Czechoslovakian off-road truck, originally military. The rear of it is a 1947 through 48 Chev Fleetmaster that's been cut down the centre and widened. And then we tried to make the rest of the tanker as strong for bashing, battering, climbing, clambering and setting fire to. There are 3 complete war rigs, which are not different in any way. If one of them's driving 200 kilometres through absolute total emptiness and we need the other one back for shooting the actors, hence it was obvious we needed at least 3 complete units. And we've built a hydraulic cowcatcher to work as both the front guards and to give us a little up and down action. Steel plate and panels decorated with the screaming skull. Basically, this is doing transport and travel runs, so it needs to be highly defensible. Hence the RSJs, the spikes, and the jagged steel hub rims to stop you being able to slash the tyres. Welcome to the interior. Obviously, we have our own favourite pieces. Mine is the accelerator, which George wanted to have a lock on so that basically it could be pushed into a high-speed drive and locked off. That kicks down, locks forward and locks the vehicle into full thrust.
Scale and scope of the vehicles, I've never had an opportunity to have so many toys to play with before.
The vehicles, they almost deserve their own titles at the end of the film.
I cannot fathom how long it must have taken to create these things because it's just so intricate, it scares me.
Georgie's box of toys and his palette and his colours and his imagination is so fantastic that you're not really in a movie. You're in Georgie's head. playing Max is very much just being able to sit with George and do whatever he wants.
I met him once and I just knew that it was going to be something really special. And then, of course, he so didn't let me down.
Whereas Charlize has the precision of the dancer, Tom has that sort of wildness. They're emotional warriors on our behalf. They're prepared to lay themselves with all their humanity in front of an audience.
The best thing about Max is that he's not just a quintessential cookie-cutting hero. He's an anti-hero. A man who's got a tremendous amount of trauma and horror in his life, and all he wants to do is go home. That he doesn't have a home. He's searching for something.
It was that thing that went the moment Tom walked through the door, I felt that same, whatever that feeling is that I felt when Mel Gibson first walked in the door 30-odd years ago.
There's no point in ever trying to pretend that I was going to replace Mel's Max. Mel Gibson is Mad Max. That's that.
They used to say, no Mel, no Max. But there is that similarity between Tom and Mel. Very masculine. At the same time, there was a softness capable of gentleness as well. So it was a very interesting dynamic.
I met Mel. We had lunch, and he handed over the torch. I don't think he felt very impressed at the time, but I think that's Mel's one. And then he wrote some nice emails as well to my agent and said that it was the right thing to do and that he'd possibly met somebody that was crazier than him, which can only be a compliment. George decided that he was a kind of wolf, Max.
He's in a bad way. He's captured and he's no different from a wild animal.
Monosyllabic, can't talk, doesn't know his own voice. On escaping his situation and meeting Furiosa, he slowly finds his voice, very slowly throughout the piece.
When I met with George, I believed him when he said to me, I want to create a female character that can stand next to Max, this very iconic character who's like the ultimate when it comes to this road warrior.
I thought that would be interesting, to find someone who in another time would be regarded as a great beauty, but in this post-apocalyptic world, she's become a hard-bitten warrior.
He was so excited about creating an anti-heroic woman who was really driven by these very, very pure human flaws.
The paradox here is a very strong woman, statuesque more than just physically in her persona and her spirit. And at the same time, you recognize the vulnerability. It's not just a mask. The two things are there.
This idea that she's kind of saving these women, to me, just didn't feel as interesting as they belong to a man who hurt her incredibly. And she's just had enough. And she's going to take these women with her. And she's going to take what matters to him the most. So it really is the ultimate story of revenge.
Furiosa is by far as important as Max is in the film. In many ways, it's her film, and Max is on for the ride.
They're both built to survive the most isolated, horrific elements.
Of course they meet, and of course there's a relationship, an unspoken understanding, and there's a connection between those two. And it was essential that they met, and that they connect, and they help one another, and they move forward, and they are connected. It can't end well. Nothing's good and everything hurts out there, and that's what Furiosa says to them. Everything is painful, you know?
Because she knew the world that they were going into, and there's no room for attachment. There's no room for attachment.
Max and Furiosa, they don't trust each other at all, you know, and there's no reason to. In that way, you can trust each other not to trust each other.
Hey, what's your name? What do I call you?
Does it matter?
These are two people who know only how to take care of themselves. The material allowed for us to kind of go up against each other and also create two characters that didn't, you know, fall for each other or became each other's best friend. Or this was so truthful to the world that he set them in that there was no room for anything like that to happen.
Trust has to be earned in that environment, and trust is earned by deed and not by talk, and also through necessity, because neither of them wanted to be together, but it was necessity that they had to stay together in order to get away together, in order to part company. So then he'd never see each other ever, ever again, because neither of them wanted them to be anywhere near each other.
It set up the two characters to be that, and there were days on the shoot where Tom and I felt that way towards each other, and I think it was impossible not to have that. I think even if you don't believe that material affects you, it's an impossible notion. When you're living something and doing something for 8 months straight, it just is under your skin, and you want it to be under your skin as an actor. And so there were days where I think it was almost just easier for us to show up and deal with each other in that way. We were up against conditions that didn't necessarily make for an easy shoot.
There's nothing but desert. Like nothing but desert.
The experience of silence. You know, there are no birds chirping. There's nothing happening.
It was painfully isolating at times. Painfully isolating.
Where we were was like being on the moon.
We really were in the middle of nowhere.
And then this compound of like very strange, half-naked people with, you know, harpoons and just weird. And then George would be standing in the middle of it all in this leather jacket that he never took off, and a thermal jacket, and a shirt, and his military trousers and his shoes, his, you know, his glasses on his head. Never took this leather jacket off, and it was hundreds of degrees. It was hot. George had more leather on than Max did. You'd expect any normal person to pass out in that jacket. You know what I mean? I was wearing leathers. We were hot, you know? We were very hot. And George will ask you to do things which may seem insane, and they are. And then when you see the movie, having been there, and I see what he meant now, and he was trying to explain in the sand when we were out there, and it was a nightmare. A brilliant nightmare and confusing. But it all makes sense. Perfect sense. All that I needed to do was just be with George and do what George wanted me to do.
Although we were in this vast wasteland of Namibia, for a lot of the time, our cast was stuck in the cabin of the war rig.
I realized that that was all I was doing pretty much every day showing up in this movie was getting in this war rig and dramatizing from this space that was this big. And there was a great challenge in that. And also, most of the time, you know, really only having this part of your body that you could really explore storytelling with.
So we were basically just sitting in a truck whilst people attack you. And somehow you've got to tell the story that this is a road to redemption.
I think it could be very frustrating to a lot of people, but to George, it's in the challenge of all of that, it's almost what he thrives in, and that's when he comes alive. You have a filmmaker that is seeing possibilities where you could never even see possibilities.
Once you're in that vehicle with Furiosa and Max and the girls, they're just going somewhere. There's not a lot of talking about stuff. It was almost a silent movie.
Basically, it all happens without words. They speak only when it's necessary. Furiosa is very pragmatic with the language.
Now pick up what you can and run.
Max is very laconic.
You can get in.
There is no luxury for words, but I think all of us struggled with it in the beginning. You doubt that you can get something across without the use of words. And it's good to sometimes be forced into a direction where you're out of your comfort zone.
So you need to have people around you that can show you a weight and depth and a breadth of emotion and understanding and change with very little dialogue. And that's why casting was absolutely key, you know, and Charlize, she nails it, as she always does, you know?
I think what George really, really succeeded at is creating a world that I think will be extremely satisfying to his loyal fans who love the movies from the 70s, but also to a generation who might not know those movies.
Everybody wanted to achieve George's vision, really. What he and ultimately, you know, just wanted to make him happy, because he had a plan.
I think the cast that were there bonded, as we all did, and they had difficult moments, but just having gone into the wilderness for longer than the 40 days and 40 nights and survived.
I don't think I've ever hugged cast and crew as much as I did on this film when we were done. It was a really emotional goodbye. We had really been through it. We had lived it. We were in it. It's still a very, very close family. And I don't think a lot of movies have that because it's just not enough time where you really feel like you've seen people at their worst and you've seen them at their best. And at the end of the day, you just kind of go, we did it.
The amount of detail on this film is remarkable. You kind of sit there and with the sets and the costume and every character and the whole script, the world that's been created.
Everything in this world is repurposed in some way. That's one of the great design, I think, cues that they had on the film.
Everything should be recognised, but what we hope is that a lot of it is out of context, and that jarring is what basically gives it a new freshness.
One of the big problems with post-apocalyptic movies, the instinct of everybody is to make the world look like a junkyard. And it doesn't stand up to human behavior. Even early man, Paleolithic man, without any resources, can make beautiful paintings, rock art, so that we have the instinct to do something beautiful. And so one of the rules I really had to enforce in all the design was just because it's the wasteland, it doesn't mean that people can't make beautiful things.
One of George's main briefs is surprise me, people want to be surprised. They want to be arrested by an image. And so ours has been slightly different. We have to deal using the crayons out of the same box. It basically is the world ended, and what did we do with all the bits that were left over when they finally had themselves dragged across the wasteland?
Everything that we made had to have a history in the sense that the objects would either be repurposed as well as their original function.
And then basically went to scrapyards and scavenged for anything that looks cool that could be used for something. So when they arrived in Namibia, you had all these mega bins full of rubbish, and then every time you had to basically build a new prop, you'd go and scavenge through, and whatever kind of tickled your fancy, that was the item that you're going to use to make your creation.
There's a lot of wacky, if you like, but brilliant images in there, and it's a real world. I mean, it's not a comic book world as such. It's a reality.
I'm holding a steering wheel, one of many. I'd say upwards of 50 that are immediately to my left, on a huge altar. But it goes to express just the level of detail that's gone into it, because this is it's an old phone dial, and the whole thing's been repurposed. Every wheel is like that. There's speedometers and cogs and all sorts of crazy stuff.
When you're trying to create a world that doesn't exist, you have to have some very solid ground rules. Is this too narrow to drive? Does it affect anyone's driving? Do you want any thickness on this thing?
We could.
No matter who you were, whether you're doing props or weapons or vehicles or costumes, we all worked to the same strategies.
Max starts as if he's survived maybe some ghastly war and found his way into the wilderness. This is the Tom Hardy Mad Max costume. It was made by Annalise here in Swakopmund.
That's my jacket. Sure.
We really want to have the old iconic Mad Max jacket and trousers. And then we added the T-shirt, and Tom really liked it. He said it had a medieval feel, like an old tunic.
Max's muzzle is basically made out of a garden fork. The first fitting we had with Tom Hardy, it was very, very uncomfortable, obviously with the real steel version. These tips are very, very close to his eyes, so that's why we've used a very, very soft rubber.
started off with the iconic Mad Max double-barreled Sawn-Off shotgun. There's a full-length double-barreled shotgun with the aid of a hacksaw turned into this. It's a normal 12 gauge with a little bit of engraving on it, but close enough that we can get to the original Mad Max shotgun.
We had a lot of communication about the physical appearance. It took so many different shapes over the years, which is a good thing. You know, you almost kind of have to experience all of the wrong things to get to the right thing.
George wanted the female warrior look, but I didn't want it to get, and she didn't want to get what she called Barbarella, and I just thought was, you know, too overtly fashion magazine-y sexy.
We had thought about ways to kind of make her look different than the other women. Hair was always this great obstacle that we came across because it was just impossible with my hair to do something that really set a different tone. And I had just done a press tour. I was just so done with hair and makeup. And I just literally just had this moment where I was like, I need to shave my head. We need to shave my head. Like, I can't think about what I'm gonna do with my hair in this movie anymore. I'm gonna be in a desert. I'm a new mother. Let's just shave it and stop talking about it.
Charlize really wanted a little bit of covering. The actual T-shirt, it's a mixture between what you expect, the corset look, all the female warriors, all your comic books, but it isn't, I hope. It's got a little bit more reality.
I had to work with the costume department to kind of integrate the robot arm with the rest of her costume. We've got this one here, which was one of the original, or the final designs, which is made from metal parts. It's like vice grip pieces in it and pieces of spanners. It's got a little bit of weight to it, so it's quite hard to operate or to wear for long periods of time. And so then we also had made up a soft version, which is made of leather and rubber castings for some of the stunt work.
The access to driving becomes important. How does a one-armed woman both fight a battle and drive a truck and pilot a story? And so everything needs to be within ergonomic reach and access.
Furiosa, when she starts this movie, has 11 firearms. The main firearm that she uses is the SKS rifle. We've put a wooden block on the front to aid Furiosa to grip with the claw. She's quite well equipped to defend herself and attack anybody else.
You kind of see how this world has developed from those details. It was really fun to watch them and kind of get into it, and it got me very excited about this film.
Slit screams at Nux to fang it. So the gear stick and the brake are redolent of fangs. It's a pair of dentures. Nux's very own personalised steering wheel, which is basically his attempt using a doll's head and some bits and pieces from various salvaged cars to give him his memorial to the Immortan. These are all adornments. They're there to scare the enemy, let them know who you are, what you're thinking, and that you're coming for them.
That's my head! These are the thunder sticks. You can see that it's been made out of bicycle tire, so it's all recycled equipment. This is kind of similar to human skin, and then you've got the thunder stick head at the end. These are basically made out of normal soft drink cans. They're supposed to be an explosive device that's detonated from the top. Probably the biggest challenge, I'd call it, that we've had on this job is the Max Nux chain. Had it made out of probably about 4 different materials for different applications. Each of these links is molded separately, and so far we have made 81 meters of fake chain, link by link. Basically, this chain does break fairly often. You see what I mean? So this chain has been through a lot of stress.
I'm literally using Max as a lifeline. Tom would go off to look at the monitors, and I'd suddenly see the chain tightening. I'd be like, oh, go, quick, running behind him to make sure they didn't snap his neck back, because it was kind of attached to a muzzle that he wears.
We could ask for anything.
It's very much a world that's built upon forging things with your hand.
I'm working on the guitar for the Doof Man, and I've started to break it down so that it actually works for the show. Bit of fine tuning still.
Coma's guitar is a double-necked flamethrower. It's covered in, you know, bits of car parts and trumpet parts and violin parts.
Recognisable objects, again, the resonator and body is actually a stainless porcelain bedpan.
It's got the Datsun 1600 detailed on it, which is awesome. Pieces out of a trumpet, and you've basically got a flamethrower at the end of the guitar. So you can jam and nuke people at the same time, which is really, really awesome. So Rammstein, watch out. Don't get better than this, eh?
Thea Morton. He's a real George inspiration.
Imagine somebody get a riot shield, or one of those bulletproof riot shields, and then mould it. Basically, it's a sort of plexiglass, bulletproof medieval armour with a massive breathing mask.
George wanted to see his rotting skin through. The idea of the carapace was multi-purpose, really, partly to make him look stronger, because it did have the muscles in it, but also because his body was rotting underneath and it had a protective element.
He's got a few medical problems, but I'd rather not talk about them.
The Morton's mask, made of horse's teeth and so on, also has a bladder at the back which gives him clean, filtered air.
The more, we tried many a tube, but good old Russian gas masks, nothing like them. And again, the skirt is sort of, could be anything. For George, I think it's like religious robes. Someone else said it's almost like crematorium curtains. He's got his guns, he's trying to be, you know, a man with his codpiece.
You look amazing! You look amazing! The whole fucking lot of you! Brilliant!
My terrible fear that he would look comical, I don't think he did. I think he actually looked pretty strange.
Welcome to the interior of the Giga Horse. We built the dashboard onto black cowhide leather and collected pretty much every emblem and badge of vehicle that we thought he had killed, come across, collected, and now owned. Obviously, the steering wheel, if you can afford a skull, you have a skull. Your Morton symbol is hand-beaten into the interior cladding. The Morton does have a scrubber and breather, so there's also quite a lot of medical equipment built into the car and into the vehicle. And again, this one was more to show bling. He is the Puff Daddy of his time.
Rictus! Take me!
Rictus is really a baby, never really grew up, and has a lot of baby symbols.
I have three right here on a codpiece, sticking out. It looks like a three-headed penis. It's unique. It's interesting.
The belt above it, again, it was something George loved, was that stretched baby head. And even his knee pads have baby faces, although they've become quite aged and battered over the months of filming. But it also has a breathing pack, which is, I think, pretty much a work of art. I think when we put it all together, it works.
You find things and you turn them into, you know, other things that you need. And I think that's really, really smart of them to have done that. And also time-consuming, and I would not want to be the one who had to do that.
The people who've worked on them have put an awful lot of effort into the detailing, you know, basically trying to make them as rich an environment as possible. We hope that what we've chosen shows weight and style and history, and we detail it so that it's been fetishized and loved.
And it was something that came quite unconsciously, is that there's a certain rambunctious joy to the post-apocalyptic world. There's a kind of celebratory quality. Here we are in this dark, crazy world, and it's in human nature to bring out a kind of an insane quality in their work. best described by Nux's line.
Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!
We're not going back.
The 5 wives of the Immortan are kind of just like the princesses of the post-apocalyptic world. We don't have disease, we're healthy, we're given food and water, we're looked after.
Each of the wives has a different relationship with the Immortan.
They are breeding stock that are basically providing the Immortan with an heir.
He's looking for a healthy male heir, like all monarchs and kings and most of history.
They haven't experienced much else, but I think they know that the way that they're being treated in there isn't humane. How they're living is pretty painful.
It was really, really eye-opening for me, the reality of what it meant to be in that position, to be used as an object. It was really emotional.
As horrible as it is, he's also like our father. I think he'd like to think that we adore and love him, but I'm not sure that's quite the case.
Part of signing on for the movie was on the condition that all 5 of us would agree to spending extensive time in rehearsal periods and workshopping, which for me as a new actress was a really exciting, fulfilling period.
The girls were supposed to be, as George would describe, like a 5-headed hydra.
That had to be reflected in the way they related to each other. They had to be this unit.
Everything has to kind of come through our body language and our, the looks in our eyes and these subtleties. And George wanted that all to be real.
We were kind of supposed to have spent so much time together in a small space that we'd move like each other, we'd almost speak like each other, we'd finish each other's sentences.
Each of the 5 wives are like their own musical note. They are different notes in a little melody line in this film.
It became really clear through this period that this movie has this underlying feminist quality to it, and that's really the story that the girls are trying to tell.
There's not much dialogue involved in this film, especially for the girls, so a lot of what we had to do was reacting to things that were going on around us.
I spent a lot of time reading about women who had babies through being raped, and at times it was very hard, and I really wanted to honor that with Splendid, the conflict that she would feel.
It was pretty intense stuff, and in the first month we got to know each other way too well, to the point where it was like, we were like sisters the rest of the time. Which is good and bad.
I remember when I first got the call about Mad Max, and I had imagined that we would all be in leathers and having guns and have the whole like a chick theme. But George explained that our costumes, at least these 5 women, were going to be in some form of Muslim and cotton and sheets, and that over the course of the film we would sort of get more and more disheveled and naked.
Our costumes, or lack of costumes, although simple, it's like white panties and a white bra, that type of thing, but they're actually very detailed when you look at them, and they all relate perfectly to our character.
I have more of like a sort of, it's like this crisscrossy neck thing, and I've got like braids, and I look a little bit less perfect, I think, than maybe Splendid and the other girls.
I wanted my costume to be really, really simple. The girls had like broad tops and things like that. Mine's like a hat, kind of like just a shirt, because I saw Toast as kind of a loner.
A big part of my costume was my prosthetic belly, which for me it was so important that it was real and it felt as real as possible. So the weight of the stomach it was pretty heavy, and I would put it on every morning, and by lunchtime I'd have to be lying down, and it was bizarre how familiar I became with it and it became a part of me. I'd sit there with my lunch balanced on top of it and eating.
We have to wear chastity belts, but Morton puts them on us because we're his and only his, so he takes them off only when we're with him. They're quite gruesome. They've got like teeth. Ugh, I hated wearing it.
It was rather uncomfortable for all of us. It was very real.
The costume was definitely a challenge. There was some brutal weather conditions we had to endure, especially the first 3 weeks of filming.
We were in an environment at a time of the year where it was very gray almost and incredibly cold. You can't feel that when you watch the movie.
We had to be soaking wet out in the freezing cold.
Action!
We had to roll in the dirt to get our costumes dirty to start off with, and then they drenched us down.
And camera up.
There would be this horrific moment for all of the girls where we all begrudgingly had to shed our coats and our hot water bottles and blankets and start jumping around like freaks to try and, I mean, it must have been hilarious to have watched. And I have this belly on the whole time.
Roll down.
And we were just freezing, absolutely freezing and miserable, but it meant we could use that in our characters.
One more.
I'm glad that it was the beginning of the film because we were all still we had a lot of like enthusiasm and energy and we just began.
It was fun, character building.
This part of Namibia in particular is just very desolate. It's the desert.
We'd be laying on the desert floor, singing duets and kicking our legs in the air like in some sort of strange hysteria. And then moments later, we were all like almost in tears, wanting to get the fuck out. There's this one scene with the Morton where he drives past in the Giga Horse, and it was the first time that I had ever seen Hugh in character and in costume. I couldn't breathe. There's so much that goes on, and it's like your emotional state and your mental state is heightened because there's nothing around you. There's just like desert plains for miles and miles and miles.
You kind of get plucked out of your world and you all of a sudden you get dropped in the middle of the desert for 6 months and that's all you have, and you kind of have to strip everything away and see kind of who you are. We all were very lonely, but we had to find comfort in each other and ourselves and in the story and in the desert and in George. And it was cool because it made it easier to understand this world, you know?
Close your eyes, close your eyes. You've got a problem with television, George?
The dust and the sand and the wind were pretty hard to work under. You'd be doing a scene and they're like, dust machine, and and you'd struggle to keep your eyes open. Or they'd put a wind machine in when there was already a whole heap of natural wind and it was freezing and it just made it 10 times colder.
And cut. Cut in there. Back. Very good.
There was times I'd come back from set and take a bath and drain the bath and it would just be covered in sand and mud. Or I'd have to take 6 showers to get the sand out of my hair and ears and every hole possible.
Sometimes I think that this whole thing was just like putting us in Svakemund and working in the desert was just sort of a whole ploy to make us actually go insane, which I think kind of worked a little bit.
You know, I know what I'm doing. I'm sleeping.
We were shooting in the canyons. It was really hot and everybody was sort of having a long day, and I rapped and was sort of like walking around and it's like dead silent and we're in the middle of the desert and really hot, and then all of a sudden we start like in the distance hearing Bob Marley and we're all just like, what? And we're like looking around and all of a sudden like it gets louder and louder and louder and louder, and it's like this guy comes up on a bicycle like pedaling through the canyon with Bob Marley like boombox on his bike and starts like coming up and everyone started pissing themselves, and Tom had gotten an ice cream man to come for us in the middle of the desert. It's pretty funny.
There'd be moments where we'd all be laughing and singing and mucking around, and that was great. I think, you know, the wonderful thing about working with an ensemble cast is that you build these relationships with people and you forge friendships and bonds.
This definitely has changed me as a person. And I don't think that anybody can understand unless they were in SWAT and here doing this with us, because it was pretty intense for everybody, not just us.
There's so much more behind it for, you know, what everyone went through. Like, there's just like blood, sweat, and tears into this film, for real.
We definitely shared a lot of good times and memories and laughs and all the opposite things to that too.
I think everything after this film will be almost too easy, you know?